Welcome back, beloved soul. I am so grateful you're here for part 3 in our 5-part series, Healing the Family. Today's story is titled, The Faith of the Mother, a tender and transformative journey into the quiet strength that shapes generations. In this episode, we step into the world of Eunice and Lois, two remarkable women whose devotion and perseverance helped raise one of the early church's most influential leaders. Their story reminds us that even in homes marked by imbalance or spiritual silence, a mother's faith can become a steady flame that lights the way forward. As you listen, may your heart be open to the beauty of your own journey, your own lineage, and the quiet ways love continues to work in the background of your life. Let us begin.
Picture a moment when a mother's quiet faith becomes the hidden force that shapes a destiny. Imagine the soft light of morning spilling over the rooftops of a small town, the air cool and clear before the heat of the day. In a modest courtyard paved with worn stones, a woman moves quietly between clay jars and woven baskets. Her skin is the deep warm brown of the hills around her, her hair gathered back beneath a simple cloth, her linen garments brushing the dust as she walks. Her name is Eunice. Around her, the house is just beginning to stir. A small fire glows near the hearth. The scent of baking bread drifts into the open air. Birds call from the branches of an old fig tree that leans over the courtyard wall. Everything looks ordinary, yet inside her heart something sacred is awake. She pauses to look at her son. Timothy sits near the doorway, long lashes resting against his cheeks as he slowly opens his eyes to the day. His skin has the warm tone of the earth beneath his feet, his dark curls tousled from sleep. He is still young, but there is a depth in his gaze that often surprises her. In this blended household, where cultures and customs meet and mingle, she wonders what will shape him most. Will it be the songs he hears in the streets, the stories told in the marketplace, the rituals of those who bow before many gods? Or will it be the quiet faith she carries in her own heart, the faith her mother Lois carried before her, the faith of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Lois steps into the courtyard, her movements slower but no less graceful. The lines on her face tell stories of laughter and tears, of long journeys and longer prayers. Her olive-toned skin bears the gentle marks of age, and her eyes hold a kind of light that does not fade with time. She greets her daughter and her grandson with a smile that feels like a blessing all on its own. In her hands, she carries a small scroll wrapped carefully in cloth. She has carried the words of God in her memory for years, and now she carries them in this home, ready to be planted in another generation. After the morning meal, when the sun has risen but the heat is still gentle, Lois settles beneath the fig tree and calls Timothy to her side. He comes quickly, leaning against her knee as children often do, his fingers tracing the folds of her garment. Eunice sits nearby, listening with a heart that is both hungry and full. Lois begins to speak. She does not start with argument or fear. She starts with story. She tells of a God who brought their ancestors out of bondage, who led them through wilderness and gave them a land of promise. She remembers the words from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, that the commandments of God should be on their hearts, and that they should teach them diligently to their children, when they sit in their houses, and when they walk by the way, and when they lie down, and when they rise. She does not quote them stiffly. She breathes them, turning them into a rhythm that fits the life of this home. Timothy listens, his dark eyes fixed on her face. He hears of seas that opened, of manna in the morning, of a God who sees and hears and remembers. He hears that this God is near to those who call on him in truth. He does not understand everything, but something in him responds to the certainty in his grandmother's voice. It feels like a root sinking quietly into the soil of his soul. Eunice watches this with a tenderness that almost aches. She remembers her own childhood, the way Lois had once spoken these same stories over her by lamplight in another town, another season. Back then, she had not known where life would take her. She had not known that she would marry into a family with different customs and different gods, that her home would one day be a meeting place of traditions. She had not known how many questions she would carry, or how often she would wonder if her faith could truly hold in such a setting. But here she is, and here is her son, leaning in close to the same stories that once shaped her. She feels both small and strong at the same time. Later, as the day grows quieter and the sun tilts westward, Eunice finds a moment alone in the courtyard. The shadow of the fig tree stretches across the stones. A clay jar rests beside the wall. The house is full of ordinary sounds, but her heart is listening for something more. She looks up at the strip of sky overhead and speaks softly, almost under her breath. Lord, you know this house. You know every voice, every story, every heart that lives beneath this roof. You know the paths that have brought us here. I do not control them all. I do not fully understand them all. But I offer you this one thing. I offer you my son. Let your truth take root in him. Let your light rise in him. Let the faith you placed in my mother and in me live in him as well. Far away, in another time, an older man named Paul will remember this. He will write to Timothy in what we now call 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 5, saying that he remembers Timothy's sincere faith, a faith that first lived in his grandmother Lois and in his mother Eunice, and now lives in him also. But in this moment, Eunice does not know how her prayer will be remembered. She only knows that the words feel important, that they feel like a seed pressed into the ground of her own heart. As the days turn into weeks and the weeks into seasons, this small family moves through rhythms that would look ordinary to anyone passing by. Lois grinds grain and kneads dough. Eunice hauls water from the well and mends garments worn by labor and life. Timothy helps where he can, his hands growing stronger as his body stretches toward manhood. They laugh together, argue at times, share simple meals. The streets outside their door carry the sounds of different languages and beliefs, voices rising from Roman temples and conversations about new ideas. The home is not shut away from the world. It breathes within it. But inside these walls, another atmosphere is always present. In the evenings, when the lamps are lit and the shadows dance along the plastered walls, Eunice and Lois find ways to weave faith into the fabric of their routines. They recite psalms while they work, remembering that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit, as Psalm 34 verse 18 tells them. They share stories of Hannah, who brought her sorrow and her longing to God and was heard. They speak of Miriam, who sang on the far side of the sea after deliverance. They talk about the God who holds widows and orphans close to his heart, who is described in the Psalms as a father to the fatherless and a protector of those who stand alone. They do not sit Timothy down for stiff lessons that feel like burdens. They invite him into a living stream of faith that moves through conversation, song, memory, and lived example. When he sits, they talk to him. When they walk the narrow streets together, they point out reminders of God's care in small things. When he lies down, they bless him. When he rises, they greet him with words of life. The command from Deuteronomy is not a rule to them. It is a rhythm. At times, Eunice still feels the strain of her place in this blended household. There are moments when conversations around her table drift into ideas she does not share, when practices she does not fully embrace unfold in corners of the family. Yet something in her has shifted. She no longer sees herself as someone trying to make up for what others are not doing. She sees herself simply as someone who carries light. She does not need to speak against everyone else. She only needs to keep the flame entrusted to her burning steadily so that her son can see by it. You may recognize something of your own life in hers. You may live in a home where beliefs meet and differ, where some love God openly and others remain unsure or uninterested. You may have children or grandchildren who absorb influences from many sources, some of which you cherish and some that trouble you. You may wonder if your quiet faith is strong enough to matter in the swirl of it all. You may ask yourself if what you carry in your heart can truly reach the ones you love. This is where the story of Eunice and Lois speaks very gently and very clearly. It tells you that your calling is not to control every influence or manage every heart. Your calling is to be faithful with what you have been given, to tell the stories of God's goodness in your own voice, to pray the prayers that rise from your own soul, to live the kind of life that reveals in small, steady ways that there is a God who is near, who listens, who loves. On another evening, Timothy curls up at his grandmother's side as she hums an old melody. The lamplight softens the contours of their faces. Eunice watches them from across the room, a piece of mending forgotten in her lap. She sees the way Timothy rests against Lois without fear, the way his face relaxes as he listens. She realizes that these ordinary moments are the very place where a spiritual inheritance is being passed on. No one outside their home will ever fully know how many of these evenings there have been, or how many quiet prayers have been whispered in the half-light. But God knows. Heaven counts what the world never sees. In time, this boy will grow. He will step into a larger story than any of them can yet imagine. He will become a companion to Paul, a leader in the early gatherings of believers. He will carry letters and messages, and his name will be known across lands they have never visited. But every step he takes will carry the imprint of these early days, these simple scenes of a mother and grandmother who chose to hide the word of God in his heart long before his name was ever written in a letter of Scripture. For now, though, all of that is still in the future. In this moment, what matters is that faith is alive in this home, quietly and steadily. What matters is that a mother and a grandmother are tending a flame that will one day light many lamps. And what matters for you as you listen is this invitation that rises gently from their story. You too can tend such a flame. You too can plant seeds in ordinary days that God will one day cause to grow into something far beyond what you can see. The seasons continue their gentle turning, and with each passing year, Timothy grows taller, his footsteps firmer on the stone paths that wind through the town. He helps Eunice gather water from the well, lifting the heavy clay vessel with both arms as she steadies it. He walks with Lois to the marketplace, where the scents of roasted grain and honeyed figs mingle with the dust of the streets. He listens as merchants call out prices in different languages, voices rising over the clatter of pottery and the rustling of woven fabrics. The world around him is a tapestry of cultures, customs, and beliefs, but the thread woven deepest into his heart is the one placed there in the quiet of his own home. One afternoon, as the sun hangs low and golden over the hills, Eunice and Timothy walk together along the edge of the fields outside their town. The sky is streaked with warm colors, the air alive with the sound of crickets hiding among the tall grasses. Eunice looks at her son and sees the beginnings of questions forming in his eyes, the kind that come when childhood innocence begins opening to the complexity of the world. He asks her why their neighbors worship differently, why some offer incense to gods he does not know, why others celebrate festivals he has not been taught. Eunice listens carefully, her steps slow and thoughtful. She does not rush to explain everything. She does not criticize what she does not embrace. She knows that Timothy is not asking for arguments. He is asking for grounding. So she tells him the story that has shaped her life, the story she has learned through the lips and tears of the women before her. She tells him that when she was young, her mother Lois taught her that the one God, the God of Israel, is not limited to temples made by human hands. He is the God who walks with his people in the wilderness, who hears them when they groan, who feeds them when they hunger, who shelters them when they fear. She tells him that this God is near to those who seek him with a sincere heart. She remembers the words of Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 13, that those who seek him with all their hearts will find him. She speaks these words gently, so they settle into Timothy not as commands, but as invitations. As they walk, a soft wind moves through the fields, carrying with it the scent of wild herbs and the quiet rustling of leaves. Eunice looks at her son and feels something stir within her. It is not fear that he will wander. It is hope that he will search for God with his own questions, his own longing. She understands now that faith does not blossom through pressure or fear. It grows through presence, through lived example, through the authenticity of a heart that trusts even in uncertainty. Back at home, Lois kneels near the hearth, grinding spices with slow, practiced movements. The fragrance of coriander and cumin fills the air. When Eunice and Timothy return, Lois looks up and smiles at them, her eyes bright despite the weight of years. She invites Timothy to sit beside her and help sift the flour. As he works, she begins to speak once again, not in long stories this time, but in small reflections drawn from a lifetime of walking with God. She tells him how sometimes faith feels like a quiet light in the corner of a room, steady but not loud. How sometimes it feels like a song hummed under the breath while working. How sometimes it feels like tears falling silently when no one else sees. She tells him that God hears the prayers of those who come to him with honesty, even if those prayers are small or uncertain. She tells him that faith is not something you wear to impress others. It is something you tend within yourself, like the flame of a lamp that must be trimmed and fed with oil. In the soft evening light, Eunice and her son Timothy, with their warm, olive-toned skin, and Timothy with his dark, curly hair, move through their days in the small, ancient, Jewish town they call home. Timothy listens with a seriousness beyond his years. Eunice watches and feels gratitude rise in her chest. She knows she is not doing this alone. Her mother's wisdom is a well she draws from daily, and her son is drinking from it too. She thinks of the lineage of faith stretching back through generations of women whose names she knows and whose names she has forgotten. Some lived in peace, others lived in hardship. All of them carried the flame forward, one simple act of devotion at a time. Now it rests with her and with her son. As he grows older, Timothy begins to accompany Eunice on errands to the synagogue, where scrolls are read and the sacred words spoken aloud. He watches the elders recite passages from the Torah and the prophets. He listens to voices chanting ancient psalms, their melodies weaving through the air like threads of memory. He learns the story of Samuel, who heard God's voice in the night when he was still a boy. He hears of David, the shepherd who trusted God in the face of giants. He hears of Esther, who stood courageously in a moment of danger. These stories do not simply stay on the page. They root themselves inside him, taking shape through his mother's and grandmother's example. One evening, after returning from the synagogue, Timothy lingers in the courtyard as Eunice begins preparing the evening meal. The sky is deepening into shades of amber and rose. He looks at her with a thoughtful expression and asks how she knows that God hears her when she prays. Eunice pauses, holding a handful of lentils in her palm. She looks at her son, her eyes soft with recognition. She has asked this very question many times herself. She tells him that she does not always feel God's presence. There are days when she prays and feels nothing. There are nights when she wonders if her words rise only to the ceiling. But she has learned something over the years. She has learned that faith grows not from feelings alone, but from trust. Trust that God is who He says He is. Trust that He hears the cries of His people. Trust that He remembers them, even when they forget Him. She quotes softly from Psalm 34, verse 4, that those who seek the Lord and call upon Him are delivered from their fears. She tells him that sometimes the answer is not a voice or a sign, but a quiet strength that comes when she needs it most. Timothy listens, his brow furrowed in concentration. He does not fully understand, but something in him leans toward her words. The courtyard feels still for a moment, as if the air itself is listening. Then he asks if God will guide him the way God guided Samuel. Eunice smiles, touched by the innocence and depth of his question. She tells him that God knows him by name, and that the God who guided Samuel can guide him too. He only needs to listen with a heart willing to obey. As the years move on, Timothy begins to develop a character marked by compassion, humility, and a hunger for truth. He helps the elderly in the marketplace, offering to carry their bundles. He watches out for younger children on the streets, stepping between them and danger when needed. He speaks gently to those who are hurting. His heart is tender, yet growing stronger. Lois sees this and feels her spirit rejoice. Eunice sees this and feels the steady reassurance that her prayers are bearing fruit. But the story does not belong only to them. It belongs also to you, the one listening now. Because you may know these feelings yourself. You may know what it is to teach a child in the midst of uncertainty. You may know what it is to pray for someone whose journey stretches into places you cannot follow. You may know what it is to live in a household where beliefs mingle, where voices differ, where it is not always clear what influence will prevail. And in your quieter moments, you may wonder whether the seeds you are planting will take root. If these words are speaking to you, I invite you to share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. You never know whose heart might be strengthened by hearing that their quiet faith matters more than they realize. As Timothy steps into adolescence, his frame lengthens and his dark, curly hair begins to fall in loose waves around his olive-toned face. The world around him grows louder, fuller, more demanding. He notices new customs taking shape in the little Jewish village he called home all of his life. He hears unfamiliar philosophies debated in the marketplace. He watches travelers pass through, their stories filled with distant lands and different gods. Yet through it all, the atmosphere of his home remains steady. The fig tree in the courtyard still offers shade. The prayers whispered by Eunice and Lois still rise like incense. And the stories of God's faithfulness continue to echo through the hallways of his memory. One evening, he returns home troubled by something he heard in the street. A group of older boys had spoken mockingly of people who cling to the God of Israel, calling it an old-fashioned faith for people unwilling to change. Their words unsettled him. He wonders if faith is something fragile, something that can break under pressure. Eunice listens as he tells her what happened. She sets aside the basket she is holding and kneels beside him. Her voice is steady as she tells him that truth is not weakened by question or challenge. She reminds him of the stories of Daniel, who faced a kingdom that did not understand his devotion. She tells him of Ruth, who clung to her mother-in-law and to God, even in a foreign land. She tells him of Joseph, who trusted God through betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. She reminds him that faith has never lived untouched by challenge. It has always grown in places where the world pulls toward other paths. Her words soothe him, yet he still seems unsettled. He asks how he can stay strong when the world feels confusing. Eunice takes his hands in hers and tells him that strength does not come from certainty alone. It comes from relationship. Knowing God, talking to Him, asking Him for wisdom, trusting that He guides the path of the righteous. She quotes Proverbs chapter 3 verses 5 and 6, that those who trust in the Lord with all their hearts and acknowledge Him in all their ways will be guided by Him. She speaks slowly, letting each word sink deep. Timothy nods, and his shoulders relax. Something in him understands now. Faith is not a fragile thing. It is a living flame, tended by the hands of those who love God, sheltered by prayer, strengthened by truth, and fueled by trust. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something within Timothy begins to shift. His questions do not disappear, but his confidence grows. He begins to see the world not as a threat to his faith, but as the place where his faith is meant to shine. He begins to understand that the God his mother and grandmother love, is not confined to the walls of their home or the scrolls in the synagogue. He is the God who walks with his people through times of confusion and clarity alike. He is God in the marketplace and in the quiet courtyard. He is God in the diversity of cultures and ideas. He is God over seas and barren wastelands and over hearts. This realization becomes the turning point in his story. A seed planted long ago beneath the fig tree begins to sprout. A young man's inner world begins to align with the legacy handed down to him. And the quiet faith of a mother and grandmother begins its slow, powerful unfolding into a destiny neither of them can yet see. Years pass, and Timothy steps into young adulthood as a Hebrew man with warm olive-toned skin and dark, curling hair, the features of his people deepening with maturity. His shoulders broaden, his stride lengthens, and his voice gains a quiet authority that draws others to him. People in the town begin to notice his kindness, his patience, his ability to listen with genuine interest. Some come to him for help. Others come simply because they feel peace around him. Lois watches these changes with a grandmother's pride, seeing in him the fruit of years spent tending seeds of faith with prayer and perseverance. One day, word spreads through the community that a traveling teacher named Paul has arrived. People gather in the synagogue courtyard to hear him speak. His voice is firm, his eyes intense, and his message full of conviction. He speaks of the Messiah who has come, Jesus of Nazareth, the fulfillment of the promises long awaited. He speaks of grace, of salvation, of a life transformed by the Spirit of God. Timothy stands among the listeners, his heart stirring at the words. He feels something within him resonate with a deep familiarity, as if the stories he has heard since childhood were now opening into a road that stretches beyond the horizon. After the gathering, Paul stays in the town for several days, teaching and encouraging those who desire to learn. Timothy approaches him with humility and curiosity, asking questions that reveal both intelligence and sincerity. Paul notices the depth of his character, the purity of his motives, the sincerity of his faith. He sees in him the makings of a leader, not because of prestige or education, but because of the quiet fire within him. Paul speaks with Eunice and Lois, and together they recognize that Timothy has been prepared for something greater than any of them had imagined. When the day comes for Timothy to travel with Paul, the courtyard that once held his childish laughter now holds a tender, sacred farewell. Eunice stands before him, her heart full, her eyes glistening in the soft morning light. She adjusts the folds of his garment, smoothing it with hands that once held him as a newborn. Lois steps forward, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. She whispers a blessing over him, words drawn from years of prayer and faithfulness. The fig tree above them stirs in the breeze, as if bearing witness to this turning point in their family's story. Timothy embraces them both, feeling the weight of their love pressing into him like a seal. He knows that wherever he goes, their faith will go with him. The road ahead is long and unknown, but he carries a foundation that cannot be shaken. As he walks away from the courtyard and into his calling, Eunice and Lois watch him with a mixture of sorrow and joy. They have given him everything they could. Now they entrust him to God. In the years that follow, Timothy becomes a companion to Paul, traveling across cities and regions, teaching, comforting, correcting, and strengthening the early believers. He becomes known for his humility, his compassion, his steadfastness. And each time Paul speaks of him, he speaks with deep affection. In his letters, Paul reminds Timothy of the faith that first lived in Lois and Eunice. Their names are not forgotten. Their quiet devotion becomes part of the sacred history of the Church. But their story does not exist only in ancient scrolls. It lives in the hearts of those who hear it today. It lives in the mother who prays for her son even when she does not see immediate change. It lives in the grandmother who sings psalms while baking bread. It lives in the woman who lights a candle and whispers a prayer for peace in her home. It lives in every person who loves someone into faith with patience and tenderness. Their story becomes your story. It could be that you have lived in a blended household where beliefs mix and differ. Maybe you have felt unsure whether your quiet faith could thrive in such a space. Or perhaps you have wondered if the seeds you plant will ever bear fruit. The story of Eunice and Lois reminds you that God works beautifully through diversity. He works through the simple routines of life, through story and song and prayer, through the gentle shaping of character over time. He works through faith that does not force itself upon others but radiates from a life anchored in love. You may not see the fullness of your legacy in your lifetime. Eunice did not know that her son would become a leader of the early church. Lois did not know that their names would be preserved in Scripture. They simply did what was in front of them. They told the stories. They prayed the prayers. They lived the faith. And God wove their small acts into a tapestry that stretched far beyond their days. Perhaps this gives you hope. Perhaps it reminds you that nothing offered to God in sincerity is ever wasted. Every blessing whispered over a child, every bedtime story about God's goodness, every tear shed in prayer, every moment of choosing peace when your heart is weary, all of it becomes part of a legacy that God Himself tends and grows. Imagine now Eunice in her later years. The courtyard is quieter. The fig tree is larger, its branches spreading like open arms. She sits beside Lois, the older Hebrew matriarch with warm olive-brown skin and a worn shawl, drawn gently around her shoulders to shield her from the cool evening air. Eunice, wrapped in her own earth-toned shawl, leans close as they talk softly, remembering moments from Timothy's childhood. Then a letter arrives from far away. It is from Paul. Eunice breaks the seal with trembling fingers and reads the words aloud. Words of encouragement for Timothy, words of affirmation that mention her and her mother by name. Paul remembers and honors their influence. Paul sees the thread that God wove through their lives. Eunice feels tears spill down her cheeks. Lois closes her eyes, letting the weight of gratitude rest upon her. They did not seek recognition, they sought only to be faithful. And now, across miles and generations, God has honored their devotion in the heart of His servant Paul. Their faith has become part of something eternal. And now, this story returns to you. Wherever you are listening from, whatever your home looks like, whatever burdens or hopes you carry within you, hear this truth. Your faith matters, your prayers matter, your small, steady acts of love matter. You are planting something that God Himself will bring to harvest. You are shaping a legacy that may reach farther than you ever imagined. So may you be strengthened by the faith of the mother. May you be encouraged by the perseverance of the grandmother. Be reminded, O woman of faith, that God honors what is done in secret, and may He bless the seeds you plant in ordinary days. Receive comfort from Him when you feel unseen, and allow Him to fill your heart with peace when you are uncertain. And may His presence surround you and your home with a gentle, unwavering light. If this story has spoken to your heart, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe so others can discover the beauty of Scripture and the power of faith passed from generation to generation. Thank you for spending this time with me. May grace go with you, and may God bless you and those you love. It in the comments. Declare it, speak it out loud. Because when you declare your faith, you activate the power of God in your life. And if you have not already, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a message. Because we are building a community of people who are committed to growing in faith, healing from pain, and walking in the fullness of God's purpose. Remember, you are not alone. Your prayers matter. Your faithfulness is shaping the next generation. And the God who honored Eunice will honor you. And as always, peace, love, light, and unity.
Thank you for sharing this sacred story with me. If it touched your heart, you may also find peace and clarity in our Meditative Reflections playlist, a series of guided meditations inspired by these very Bible stories. Each one is crafted to help you slow down, breathe deeply, and connect more fully with God's presence in your life. Remember to subscribe, leave a comment if something resonated with you, and share this with someone who may need a little hope today. Until next time, transforming minds and empowering souls, and as always, peace, love, light, and unity.